On July 25, 2000, Concorde flight AF 4590 crashed onto a French hotel, killing 113 people. 1 year later, the world's most admired passenger jet is about to return to service. This is the story of Concorde, from its birth through to the crash and the aftermath. And it is also the story of the struggle to understand what went wrong and how the supersonic dream could become an instrument of European tragedy. Southern Rhineland, 1975. After years of waiting, the aspirations of a small but prospering German community were finally realized. And local burghers celebrated the foundation of the new town of Mönchengladbach.
The special thing about us Rhinelanders is that we like to work, achieve something and be successful. Then we enjoy life. We work hard and we play hard. At exactly the same time, the plane that would, 25 years later, bring tragedy to Mönchengladbach was being prepared for its first commercial flight. The world had been waiting for the £2 billion supersonic jet ever since a special Anglo-French Concorde Treaty was signed in 1962. For over a decade, British and French engineers had faced the challenges of the delta wing, the rolling vortex and the sonic boom together.
Alors, où est-ce qu'il travaille en ce moment, Monsieur McDonald?
Il travaille dans les ateliers.
Dans les ateliers, n'est-ce pas? Dans les ateliers.
Ceci est une fenêtre carrée.
This is a rectangular window square.
The wing design is entirely French. The engines themselves, which are in here, Rolls-Royce Olympus engines, so they're British. The engine intakes are British. The center section of the fuselage is French, and the nose section of the airplane up there is British. So you can see it really was a true Anglo-French collaborative effort that produced this magnificent airplane.
It's really a great airplane, probably the greatest. I think Great Britain and France succeeded in something nobody else did.
The British and the French had stayed in a race that had proved beyond both their main rivals, the Russians and the Americans. And through the 1960s, there were hopes that Concorde would become a must-have plane for every modern airline.
You're asking me as a salesman how many we are going to sell jointly. At least 200.
The British and the French public took the plane to their hearts. Among them, the man who, almost 30 years later, would be the closest witness to the tragic accident of July 2000, hotelier Patrick Tess.
In the eyes of the rest of the world, the French are seen as artists and lovers and things like that, not as aircraft engineers. So it was good to feel that we were not only good at making love, we could also build beautiful planes.
But by the early 70s, Concorde had a rival for domination of the skies. It was not as fast nor as technically impressive, but it was cheaper and could carry 4 times as many passengers. All of a sudden, airlines were queuing up to buy jumbos. No one was taking new options to buy the supersonic jet.
Correct, yes. How many options have you placed at the moment?
We have 74.
How many new options have you had in the last 2.5 years?
Absolutely none.
By 1972, it was clear that even these options would come to nothing. 20 planes would be built, and the only takers would be the somewhat reluctant nationalized airlines of France and Britain.
This is an historic moment for British Airways. We've today taken possession of our first supersonic aircraft.
BA management didn't have much of a business plan for Concorde. A previous MD had once thanked God that he'd avoided buying it, and the current boss was banking on the fact that the government would bail him out of the huge losses that Concorde was expected to incur.
We've no particular guarantee with regard to Concorde losses, but if you remember, there was an undertaking from Mr. Heseltine, which I think he gave on the 25th of May 1972 in the House of Commons, in which the government said that they'd see that our finances were kept in a sound position.
And what's more, the world was not going to roll out the red carpet for supersonic travel. A protest movement against Concorde and its noise pollution grew up on both sides of the Atlantic.
We dread one flight over our heads. If the French and the British made a mistake with this plane, we're sorry for them.
By the time of its launch in 1976, there was still no permission to fly supersonically over Russia or India. This ruled out trips to the Far East. It was not allowed to refuel in Nigeria, which made South Africa impossible. And Washington and New York were still refusing to grant landing rights. For the British Concordes, that left only one route: Bahrain.
Flying to Bahrain twice a week, Concorde will lose a lot of money, as British Airways admit. Not the ideal route, then.
In the years that followed, Concorde did supplement its Bahrain service with routes to New York and Washington. But it did not even begin to break even, until in 1981 there arrived at BA Mrs. Thatcher's favourite businessman, Lord King.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Rejected by other airlines, derided in the press as a hugely expensive white elephant, accused of damaging the ozone layer and polluting the environment, King saw that Concorde still had one thing going for it: charisma.
Concorde just stands out in a class all of its own. It's the Epsom Derby winner, the thoroughbred of the airline world. Alert, one to go. It really is a beautiful, powerful, responsive, marvellous aeroplane to fly.
This was the only passenger plane which could leave London at 10 in the morning and land in New York in time for breakfast. And by the early 1980s, the list of people choosing to do this was reading like a contemporary Times rich list.
Well, the sort of person who flew Concorde was the sort of person to whom time was money. People like Rupert Murdoch and Sir David Frost. But then, of course, there were the celebrities, and in amongst the celebrities, I've flown a whole galaxy of them. Muhammad Ali, Kirite Kanoa, Luciano Pavarotti, Rudolf Nureyev, Paul Newman. The list goes on and on.
King made Concorde BA's flagship, and he was bent on wringing every bit of commercial advantage he could out of it.
So, for instance, if all the staff at Merchant Bank A decide to travel with BA on their corporate account and give, say, a 10 million account per annum to British Airways, they will guarantee a certain number of Concorde upgrades, which will happen, you know, when you return from New York, you'll get upgraded every second trip or whatever. And that, of course, made it a prime marketing tool for BA to attract corporate clients from competitors.
By the end of the 1990s, Concorde was making an estimated 20 million a year profit for BA. And a quarter of a century of accident-free flying also made it one of the world's safest passenger jets.
I had actually, probably along with a lot of other people, almost got to the rather naive hope and expectation that somehow Concorde was impregnable, that it was above all the sort of laws that govern other airplanes, that it was never going to crash.
Then, in the year 2000, a charter flight was booked which would shatter Concorde's mystique and bring tragedy to France and Germany.